Let me begin by expressing our sadness at the passing of a wonderful man and a dear friend of mine.
The next President of the United States. Enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again.
WWE confirming its legendary Hall of Famer Hulk Hogan has passed away.
Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan.
We have a new champion.
He was the most famous wrestler in the world, a towering symbol of American pop culture, all muscle, charisma, and catchphrases. Hulk Hogan wasn't just a man, he was a brand, a cartoon, a living myth who slammed his way into superstardom in the 80s and 90s. But behind the bandana and the bravado was a life filled with shadows. And when the FBI came knocking at the gates of his Florida mansion, what they found left even hardened investigators stunned. Because this isn't just a story about a celebrity under investigation. It's a story about secrets, about ego, about a man who built an empire on larger-than-life stories, only to get caught in a truth stranger than fiction. For years, Hulk Hogan's life has been a whirlwind of fame, lawsuits, betrayals, and reinventions. But nothing could prepare the world for what agents discovered behind closed doors. This isn't about wrestling. It's about what happens when the mask slips and the real man steps into the spotlight. Stay with us, because once we dive in, you'll never look at Hulk Hogan the same way again.
Well, the truth is, truth be told, before I wrestled, I always kept a case of beer in the dressing room. Because the boys never had that treat. But when I was around, I had that little bit of stroke back then. I'd keep a case of beer and the boys would hit it before we go to their make the matches much better.
In the 1980s, Hulk Hogan was untouchable. With his trademark mustache, bulging biceps, and a voice that could shake an arena, Hogan became the face of professional wrestling. And more than that, a cultural phenomenon. Say your prayers, take your vitamins, and you'll never go wrong, was more than a slogan. To millions of kids, it was gospel. He headlined WrestleMania after WrestleMania, starred in films, hosted Saturday morning cartoons, sold action figures by the truckload. Hulkamania wasn't a trend, it was an empire. And behind the scenes, Hogan knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a businessman. He controlled his image with precision. He made smart investments. He befriended power players. He knew how to work the media, and he knew how to work the room. But as the 2000s approached, the veneer began to crack. A turbulent reality show, a publicized divorce, legal battles, the infamous sex tape scandal that rocked the internet and triggered one of the most controversial lawsuits in media history. By the time the FBI showed up at his door, Hogan's life was already in disarray. But what they were looking for? That would blow everything else wide open. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in Clearwater Beach, Florida, until it wasn't. At approximately 6:42 a.m., a team of federal agents arrived at Hulk Hogan's sprawling estate. Armed with a search warrant, they approached the property quietly but deliberately. No flashing lights, no sirens, just silent determination. Neighbors would later say they saw black SUVs parked discreetly along the street. A few even mistook it for a film shoot. After all, this was Hulk Hogan's house. Anything could be possible there. But this wasn't a stunt. Inside the mansion, Hogan, real name Terry Bollea, had just finished his morning routine. Protein shake, stretching, a brief check of emails. He didn't expect guests, certainly not from the FBI. The agents presented their warrant calmly but firmly. Hogan reportedly asked, "What's this about?" Their answer, according to insiders, "We believe there are materials inside your home relevant to an ongoing federal investigation." Those materials, according to redacted documents later leaked to the press, included electronic devices, documents, and potentially sensitive recordings. Sources suggest the search was tied to an expanding investigation into illegal wiretapping, digital blackmail, and undisclosed offshore assets. Wait, Hogan? The same man who used to flex his pecs and tell kids to eat their vitamins? Yes, because by this point, Hogan's life had veered far beyond the wrestling ring. The home was searched top to bottom. Hard drives, tablets, security systems, even safes built into the walls were examined. One agent was overheard muttering, "This is deeper than we thought." And while no immediate arrests were made, the search set off a chain reaction behind the scenes. Phones rang, lawyers assembled, old friends distanced themselves. The press didn't know it yet, but something major had just been unearthed. And for Hogan, the clock had started ticking. When investigators cracked open the heavy-duty safe hidden behind a paneled wall in Hogan's office, they weren't expecting much. Maybe some cash, a few contracts, memorabilia from his glory days in the ring. What they found instead chilled the room. According to sources close to the investigation, the safe contained a series of unmarked flash drives, each labeled only with a number. On those drives, hours of encrypted video files, private recordings, and emails that hadn't been seen by any court, any network, or any publicist. Some files dated back nearly 2 decades. Federal analysts would spend weeks decrypting the contents, but early reports suggest the footage included private conversations recorded without consent, financial documents linked to undisclosed accounts, and perhaps most concerning, what appeared to be a catalog of legal settlements, agreements made in private, with signatures, payouts, and non-disclosure clauses. One federal official reportedly said, "This wasn't just a celebrity with bad judgment, this was infrastructure." In other words, Hogan hadn't just stumbled into controversy, he had built a system to manage it. The safe also held handwritten notes, lists of names, reminders to call redacted about silence agreement, cryptic references to storage units and private investigators. A few pages even bore the signature of someone later identified as a known fixer for multiple high-profile clients. And tucked into an envelope marked simply "Legacy," a personal letter, apparently drafted by Hogan himself, read, "If this ever comes out, I want the full story known. I did what I had to do. I didn't ask for this life." Whether that letter was meant to explain, to confess, or to warn, no one knows. But the message was clear. What lay beneath the surface of Hulk Hogan's public persona was darker, more calculated, and far more secretive than anyone imagined. As news of the search began to spread, a ripple effect tore through Hogan's inner circle. Old allies went silent. Former business partners deleted social media posts. And in the quiet corners of entertainment law firms in Los Angeles and Miami, lawyers began reviewing their clients' past interactions with Hogan and his legal team. Because the materials the FBI found didn't just implicate Hogan, they hinted at a wider web, one involving managers, promoters, former friends, and at least one television executive. One name surfaced again and again in the seized files: Jason R., a longtime associate of Hogan who had previously worked as a behind-the-scenes consultant on several of Hogan's media ventures. Insiders describe him as the cleaner, someone whose job was to erase problems before they reached the press. Another familiar name? An ex-wrestler turned media personality, once thought to be one of Hogan's closest allies. His publicist issued a one-line statement: "He has not spoken to Mr. Bolea in over 6 years," which, in Hollywood language, might as well have been a full disavowal. Meanwhile, Hogan's team scrambled to get ahead of the story. They issued vague statements about cooperating with authorities, denied any wrongdoing, and claimed this is a misunderstanding that will be cleared up soon. But behind closed doors, there was panic, because the feds weren't backing down, and more importantly, the press had finally caught wind of the investigation. TMZ deadline, Rolling Stone, all circling. And while Hogan's public image had weathered scandals before, this one was different. This wasn't about a personal mistake. It was about the possibility of a network built on silence, surveillance, and power. Among the most disturbing revelations to emerge from the investigation was the theory, supported by both seized evidence and anonymous witness testimony, that parts of Hogan's mansion had been wired with hidden recording devices. Small, discreet, often placed in areas where guests had no expectation of surveillance. Bathrooms, bedrooms, the private gym. Federal tech analysts confirmed that some of the flash drives found in Hogan's safe contained footage that appeared to be filmed without the subject's knowledge. Some videos reportedly featured conversations of business associates, celebrities, and even law enforcement officials who had visited the property. This wasn't just surveillance for security. This was leverage. Legal experts familiar with federal wiretapping laws described the material as potentially explosive. Because if it could be proven that these recordings were used to influence deals, silence accusers, or gain advantage in lawsuits, the legal consequences would be severe. But it raised a deeper, more unsettling question. Why would someone like Hogan, already rich and famous, need that kind of leverage? Theories abound. Some believe he feared blackmail himself and used preemptive tactics. Others think he was building an insurance policy, one that would keep powerful enemies from turning on him. One former associate speaking anonymously said, "Terry always said, 'If I go down, I'm not going alone.' We thought it was just talk. Now I'm not so sure." Some of the footage, sources claim, dated back to the height of his legal battles with Gawker Media. It's unclear whether those recordings were ever used, but their mere existence paints a picture of a man who didn't just play the media game. He studied the rules and then rewrote them. And, what's more unsettling, he might not have been the only one doing it. As agents sifted through Hogan's digital and physical financial records, one detail kept resurfacing: international transfers to accounts in offshore tax havens, including the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. Over the course of several years, millions of dollars had quietly moved in and out of these accounts, often under LLCs with vague names. Many of them were tied to entities Hogan had never publicly acknowledged: production companies, licensing fronts, and consulting firms. The transactions weren't illegal on their own. Celebrities often use shell companies for privacy and asset management. But what caught investigators' attention were the timing and the recipients. Some payments coincided directly with lawsuits Hogan was involved in. Others lined up with private settlements. Hush money, if you believe certain insiders. One transaction, flagged as suspicious, involved a seven-figure payout to a private island property trust registered in the Bahamas. That trust, it turns out, was controlled by someone close to Hogan's inner circle, a longtime confidant who had vanished from public view shortly after the Gawker case ended. When the IRS was looped into the investigation, the tone shifted. This was no longer just about personal scandal. It was potentially about fraud, about tax evasion, about financial structures designed to hide, not protect. And behind it all stood the man who once asked the world, "What you gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you?" Now, it seemed the federal government was asking him that very question. As the investigation intensified and the press began circling like vultures, Hogan's legal team moved into full crisis mode. They weren't just trying to defend a celebrity, they were trying to protect a brand. Within days, a phalanx of attorneys specializing in federal defense, defamation, digital privacy, and estate protection were brought in. They issued cease and desist letters to media outlets speculating on the contents of the FBI's warrant. They filed motions to suppress evidence, and they began planting stories in sympathetic outlets, painting Hogan as the target of a politically motivated witch hunt. One lawyer, in an off-the-record comment to a journalist, said, "They're going to make him out to be some kind of tech villain, but this is still the guy who wore yellow tights and told kids to say their prayers. Let's not forget that." But behind the bravado, there was fear. According to leaked emails, Hogan's legal team was especially concerned about three things: the recordings that may have violated federal wiretap laws, the financial trail connecting Hogan to offshore trusts and undisclosed settlements, the reputational collapse that could follow if the public turned on him for good. They began building a defense strategy centered around plausible ignorance. If Hogan didn't personally install the cameras, or authorize the transfers, or read the fine print on the settlements, he could argue that others acted without his full knowledge, that he was a celebrity, not an accountant or a spy. But investigators weren't buying it. They had emails with his signature, voicemails in his voice, footage showing him reviewing documents that matched items seized in the raid. The strategy wasn't working, so the legal team changed tactics. They began exploring settlement options, quietly reaching out to federal prosecutors, whispering about minimizing exposure and protecting the family name, because they knew what was coming, and it was bigger than even Hulk Hogan. Once news of the FBI raid became public, the media went into overdrive. It was the perfect storm: scandal, celebrity, and secrecy. Late-night hosts made jokes. Former co-stars distanced themselves. Old interview clips resurfaced, showing Hogan making bold claims about honesty, trust, and legacy. Fans flooded forums, split between disbelief and betrayal. Hogan files began trending on Twitter. Some defended him fiercely. Others mocked his fall from grace. But most were just stunned. How could this be the same man who once stood tall as a cultural hero? Sponsors vanished overnight. A scheduled WWE Hall of Fame appearance was quietly postponed. Retailers pulled Hogan merchandise pending review. Even former colleagues who had stood by him during the Gawker trial went silent. But the biggest shock came when a former ally, someone deeply embedded in Hogan's business affairs, gave a damning anonymous interview to a major outlet. He knew what he was doing, the source said, and he knew it would all catch up eventually. But I think he figured he'd always be able to flex his way out of it. The interview went viral. Suddenly, Hogan wasn't just a man under investigation. He was a symbol of fame gone unchecked, of power abused behind closed doors, of how even the biggest, boldest personalities have cracks beneath the surface. The world wasn't just watching him fall, it was wondering how high he'd really climbed on a foundation of secrets. As the investigation widened, it wasn't just Hulk Hogan in the crosshairs. His family, once the stars of a wholesome reality series that painted them as the all-American clan, found themselves dragged back into the spotlight, but this time under far darker circumstances. Brooke Hogan, his daughter, who had long tried to pivot away from her reality TV past into a quiet music and media career, issued a carefully worded statement. "I love my father. I can't speak on ongoing investigations, but I know who he is in his heart." It was a soft defense, and to many, not nearly enough. The press began digging into Brooke's finances, her production deals, her joint ventures with her father's companies. The question wasn't just, what did Hulk know, but who else benefited? Meanwhile, Nick Hogan, Hulk's son, already infamous for his past legal troubles, was reportedly contacted by investigators. Not as a suspect, but as someone who may have been aware of the financial operations happening around the family estate. He refused comment. Behind the scenes, Sources close to the family described the mood as tense and paranoid. Phones were replaced, email accounts deleted. One relative reportedly left the country temporarily just to clear their head. For a family that once marketed themselves as America's version of the Osbournes, eccentric but tight-knit, the silence was deafening. Old episodes of Hogan Knows Best began circulating online again, but this time viewed with irony. "We thought we were watching a sitcom," one YouTube commenter wrote. "Turns out we were watching the prologue to a real-life thriller." Family friends, once eager to appear on camera, now declined interviews. A few described the house as a fortress, with new security protocols, closed blinds, and an eerie quiet. And through it all, Hogan himself remained hidden. No tweets, no interviews, no public appearances. Just a looming silence that made the world wonder. Was he planning a comeback? Or was this the beginning of the end? Among the most shocking findings in the FBI's case, Files was a folder buried deep within an encrypted hard drive. Labeled simply Insurance, its contents allegedly point to a darker game being played behind the scenes, one in which Hogan wasn't always the hunter, but sometimes the prey. According to federal sources, the folder contained multiple audio clips and scans of documents that suggest Hogan himself may have been a victim of attempted blackmail in the early 2010s. The timing is crucial. This was during the height of the Gawker scandal, when Hogan's most private moments were being dissected by the media. The stress, the exposure, the public shaming, it all created the perfect storm for someone to move in and make a demand. One clip, partially transcribed in leaked notes, features a voice resembling that of a former business associate saying, "We know what else you've got, and we both know you don't want it out there. Pay the number." The number is believed to be in the seven-figure range. Investigators haven't confirmed if the payment was ever made. But what's notable is that shortly after this time, several of Hogan's lawsuits were abruptly dropped. Some were settled quietly, others simply vanished from court calendars. And in that same time frame, Hogan's financial footprint changed dramatically. Properties were sold, companies were restructured, accounts moved offshore. Was it a coincidence? Or was Hogan forced into decisions that would later pull him deeper into legal and ethical gray zones? It paints a far more complex picture of the man behind the persona. A man who may have started with good intentions, protecting his family, preserving his image, but who, when cornered, made choices that spiraled into something else entirely. And now, years later, those choices were catching up to him. Because insurance policies can't protect you when the whole world starts paying attention. As the dust settles around the investigation, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The man once known as Hulk Hogan, the superhero of the wrestling world, the symbol of strength, loyalty, and charisma, is now a symbol of something else entirely. A cautionary tale. Because while the public waits to see if charges will be filed or if the case will fade into the fog of media distraction, one thing is clear. Something was found. Something real. And whether it leads to indictments or just reputational collapse, the impact has already begun. This isn't just about a fall from grace. It's about what happens when the mask becomes the man. When the lines between public image and private reality blur so deeply that no one, not even the man himself, can tell where the character ends and the truth begins. In private, those close to Hogan say he's changed. More guarded, less animated. A man who spends more time looking backward than forward. One longtime friend described a recent visit like this. "He still talks like the old Hulkster sometimes. But you can tell, he knows. He knows the world isn't cheering anymore. Yet somehow, there's still a part of him that believes in the comeback. That one more WrestleMania moment, one more brother, shouted into the mic, could make people forget. But this story isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering. Remembering that fame doesn't erase flaws, that strength can't hide secrets forever, and that even legends are human. The FBI may or may not bring formal charges. The files may remain sealed, or they may leak in waves. The public may grow bored or obsessed. But the truth? The truth is out there now, and it's louder than any entrance music. So the next time you see a red and yellow bandana, or hear that iconic theme song, ask yourself, what do we really know about the heroes we cheer for? And what's hiding in the stories we've never dared to question? Because maybe, just maybe, the real battle isn't fought in the ring, it's fought in the silence that follows. So, what now? The mansion has gone quiet. The press vans have moved on. The fans have turned their eyes to the next scandal. But for Hulk Hogan, the man behind the myth, the consequences linger in the shadows. The investigation might stall. The files might never see a courtroom. Or they might explode into public record, dragging decades of secrets into the light. We don't know yet, but what we do know is that the world has changed. And for the man who once said, "What you gonna do, brother, when Hulkamania runs wild on you?" the question now is far more sobering. What you gonna do when the truth runs wild on you? Because this wasn't just a search warrant, this was a mirror. A mirror held up to a culture that builds legends quickly and buries truth even faster. A reminder that behind every celebrity facade, there may lie stories too strange, too twisted, and too real for prime time. And for those who still believe in the red and yellow, maybe it's time to believe in accountability too. Because no one is untouchable. Not even heroes. Not even Hulk Hogan. Let us know in the comments what you think really happened behind those mansion gates. Was it all a misunderstanding? Or was this a web decades in the making? And if you want more stories like this, the hidden truths, the quiet downfalls, the whispers Hollywood hopes you'll ignore, make sure to hit subscribe. Because fame may fade, but secrets? They always surface.